Good morning, everyone. It's 8:30 on my clock, and welcome to day 2 of the virtual workshop series on water resources management and irrigation in Kansas. This series are offered by the Natural Resources PFT at K-State Research and Extension and Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment. My name is Alexey Sheshukov, and I am a co-chair of the Natural Resources PFT, and I will be moderating the session today. This event is offered also as a professional development event for county extension agents, so please log in and choose it in pairs. So we have total of 5 sessions. We started it yesterday with day 1 on sustainable water resources in Kansas with presentations from different agencies, state agencies, as well as groundwater management districts. All the events, all the sessions are streaming online at the same time as we have the Zoom. So please do not log into both sessions or to both streaming platforms, so we don't have any issues with mics interfering with each other. Also, if you can, please enter your name and email in the chat session so we can document and also keep track of all the people that attended this session. So Zoom ID as well as the passcode is the same for all 5 sessions that begin at 8:30 a.m. In March, and also one session in April. While we are listening to presentations and answering questions, please mute your microphones, use chat to sign in and ask the questions. So we have a couple of other co-moderators who are tracking all activity on the chat. So speakers, we have distinguished speakers today that will present for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion after that. Although our end time is listed as 9:30 a.m., so we don't want to keep you longer, but at the same time, if the discussion continues, so we will not end the session and try to answer all the questions that's posed. And with this, I would like to proceed with day 2. And this session is on understanding irrigation systems and new technologies. We have 3 distinguished speakers. Dr. Jonathan Aguilar, who is a Extension Water Resources Engineer with Kansas State Research and Extension, and he is based in Garden City, Kansas. Dr. Bill Golden is a Research Assistant Professor at K-State in the Department of Ag Economics, and Dr. Matthew Sanderson, who is a Randall Hill Distinguished Professor of Sociology, Anthropology, and Social Work, and also a Professor of Geography and Geospatial Sciences, also at Kansas State University. So with this, I turn it over to Matt, and he will discuss the attitudes toward water in the High Plains Ogallala region as resulted from the survey conducted a couple of years ago.
Thank you, Alexey. And it's good to be with you all this morning to share with you a little bit about a survey that we completed a few years ago, pretty recently, in the High Plains region. Alexey, I imagine I'll just tell you to, yeah, there you go.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, so I will be advancing and you will tell me.
Okay, because I have no control. Okay. All right, so a little bit about the motivation quickly for the study. I'm going to move you through a few of the key points from the study. A little bit about the motivation for the study. Time is running shorter and shorter in the Ogallala region. It's been a long time. We've been talking about water conservation, sustainable use out there, and we don't know much about how people view water and how and why they value water or not. So we were very interested. This was part of a large USDA funded study very interdisciplinary, lots of folks contributing. We were very interested in where are the shared values, where are the tensions around attitudes towards water use and water conservation. And the idea was, if we understand those shared values and those shared tensions a little bit better, we can help build capacity toward conservation much more quickly if conservation is a goal. And so one of the first questions we ask, and I'll show you this in a second, is there a problem? Is water use, is water conservation a problem? And whether this is very important, it may seem very basic, but if people that are subject to the problem don't actually believe there is a problem necessarily to be managed or otherwise, then conservation efforts lack legitimacy. And as a social scientist, that's a big problem, right? One of the first things we want to understand is, how do people view a situation, a problem? And then that tells us a lot about how we go about actually addressing or solving a problem. So if people subject to the problem, producers, community members, so on, don't actually believe there is a problem, then it's going to be really hard to manage or otherwise address that problem. All right, so we start off a little bit about the data and the methods quickly. This survey was run in early 2018 through the middle of the year 2018. We received very good response, about 1,200 responses across the 6-state Ogallala region. The data, we've been looking at the data represent the target population very well. They match up very well with the US Ag Census figures for basic descriptive statistics like age and education and income and type of farm operations. And we got very good variation on between irrigators and dryland operators. We got roughly a split in the data. So we can investigate a lot of different relationships with that degree of variation. So that's a little bit about the data and the methods. The first key finding, I'm going to take you through just a few because I've got about 10 minutes or so. So the first key finding that came out was in response to this question about, should groundwater be saved? Should it be conserved? It's a very basic question, but we needed to understand the level of agreement with this question. And again, this is across the aquifer. Overall, we have overwhelming support for conservation. 9 out of every 10 roughly responses said yes, groundwater should be saved. If you include non-responses, we're at about 85%. So 85 to 90%, very high overall. Now, when you break this down by state, Kansas is the third highest response there. 90% of folks that responded in Kansas say, yes, groundwater should be saved. So we're on fairly firm ground here for we didn't know this really before. This question hasn't been asked in the region. So we're on fairly firm ground when we say that there's a motivation for groundwater conservation in the region. Alexi. Okay, so there was the only other region-wide study of attitudes towards groundwater conservation and use happened 34, 35, 36 years ago in the mid-80s. And so we asked the question just the same as they did in the mid-80s from this Crom and White study. How serious? So is there a problem? Yes. How serious is the problem? Was the next question we looked at. And in the mid-80s, 84% of respondents said the problem was serious, right? Our study, we asked the very same question, nearly 4 decades later. And in the 14 counties that Crom and White in the mid-80s surveyed, we got the exact same average, 3.74 on a 4-point scale. So the problem, 87% said yes, it's a serious problem. Okay, next slide. All right, so does the view of problem severity vary by state? Right, so they could not do this in the mid-80s study. We had a much larger sample size, so we could look at differences across state. First thing is that obviously there's a very clear difference with Nebraska and everybody else. So Nebraska's got more water. They tend to view the problem as a less serious problem. Makes sense. In 5 of the 6 states in the region, we have a super majority, or 2/3 of all respondents telling us this is a serious or very serious problem, right? And the point I want to pull out here, since this is a Kansas audience, is that 74%, right, of respondents in Kansas tell us it's a serious or very serious problem. So we're looking at 3 out of every 4 respondents, very high level. Okay, we asked whether groundwater should be used. This is a comment I would hear periodically. We did a lot of field work in the region. We would hear this comment periodically, so we put it to the test and asked, how widely shared is this view that groundwater does no good in the ground? It should be used, right? We found this is relatively a minority position. Only about a quarter agree to some extent with this question. Large 29% are neutral on this question. So there isn't a large majority, clearly, and probably a minority opinion that groundwater does no good. It should be used. Okay. And Kansas, point I want to make here is that Kansas scored the lowest of all the states on this particular question. Only 14% of respondents in Kansas agreed with that statement, that groundwater does no good in the ground, so to speak. Okay, another point that emerged from this study was that in all states we looked at, the perception of groundwater loss, was more of a problem for the community than a personal problem. That was a little bit of a surprising finding. So when we asked, groundwater levels are a problem for my farm or my household or my community, we did different levels, so to speak, from the personal up to the state. And in all states, producers are telling us that groundwater loss is more of a problem even for the community than for the state. So, and in Kansas, the gap between the personal and the community is largest, which means that Kansans, 37% here are telling us groundwater is a problem for my particular operation or farm. 61% of respondents are telling us groundwater loss is a problem for my community. So there's a really strong, what we would say, sort of community or altruistic motivation for conservation. And that's especially true of respondents in Kansas. So then we asked, finally, for today, we asked, why should groundwater be conserved? What are the motivations for conserving? Should it be conserved so it's available to producers if commodity prices are higher in the future? About 40% of folks, plurality, agree with that statement. We see much higher levels of agreement on drought and altruistic measures, which I'll show in a second. But 73, so nearly 3 out of every 4 respondents told us that it should be conserved if drought becomes more frequent. So drought was a very strong motivation for conservation. We move on to the next. There were strong altruistic reasons for conservation that we found from this survey. Groundwater should be conserved today so that jobs and businesses will continue to be available to my community in the future. About 2/3 agree, much higher even than the commodity prices motivation, so that future generations in my area can enjoy the benefits I have or experienced. Nearly 90%, 86% agree with that statement, so that my children and grandchildren can enjoy the benefits I've experienced. Again, 85% agree with this statement. So a very strong sort of intergenerational and community motivation for conservation was we found in the region. Yeah, go ahead, Alexi. So wrapping up, just a few points. Clearly, Nebraska is different. That's not a huge surprise. They have more water. Yes, we do have a problem in the eyes of the stakeholders in this region, the producers, We did not survey community members. This was only a survey of producers. Yes, there is a severe problem, and it's about as severe in perception as it was in the mid 80s. Drought is a major personal reason to conserve, okay? But a key aspect, we think, of the challenge going forward is about social and community motivation for conservation, okay? And so despite lots of personal exposure or vulnerability, again, we have a lot of diversity in this data, despite different levels of vulnerability to groundwater loss, the perception of community dependence on this resource is stronger and less variable among respondents. And so the good news coming out of this is that it does seem to be that there is sufficient motivation among producers, especially in Kansas, to conserve this resource, especially for the well-being of others in the community. It's a potentially surprising finding, given the way that producers are often portrayed as sort of greedy and water hungry and so on. That's not what we find in this particular study, and it is the widest, most representative sample that we have in the past 40 years. So I wanted to thank our funders, the USDA, NEFA, and Ogallala Water Cap project that had a very large team of folks across the 6 states, and then K-State as well. And I hope this will be useful to you, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Matt. All the questions, please put them in the chat, and we will answer them at the end, so we don't interrupt the flow of the presentations. So next, kind of like on the heels of Matt's presentation, so let's look into the trends of irrigation technologies, irrigation systems, and management tools as well. And to do that, we invite Dr. Aguilar from Garden City to present his findings.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be part of this event and seminar, and just share to you some of the items that we have been seeing, and particularly in the trends that I think is very relevant to what Matt has just mentioned. So to give to give us a good summary of what I'm going to talk about, I would like to put this into perspective that irrigators are doing something, but I think there is still some work that needs to be done. Irrigation water is important, as Matt has mentioned, but there's still some trends that we are seeing, and I'm going to show it to you, and also how to navigate through the tools and issues that are available for us. So for people that are not very familiar with irrigation, I know that this will be posted later on. I just like to walk you through some of the items that many irrigators already know. We irrigate because we would like to improve yield. We would like, in particular, to narrow the yield gap wherein you have this potential for any of the crop, and you could not achieve those potential if you don't have water in many ways. Increase the net return. We probably know many of those. One thing that is also important about irrigation is that we do stabilize yield, particularly during the drought, and also improve the product quality. As Matt has already mentioned, it does improve local economy, as well as reduce risk, particularly when there is that rainfall timing. We don't get it when we want it. This is just a quick overview of the state, from a very less precipitation in the west to the more precipitation on the east. But I would like to show you one study that has been done in Iscandia that shows the importance of irrigation. Next. So in Iscandia, what they did is that they have plots side by side with irrigation and without irrigation. And you could see here, this is a typical slide that we usually show, is that the impact of irrigation, even in just one application of irrigation, is really dramatic. And so this is just one of that proof that there is an importance of that water when you apply it at a very strategic time. More than that, we know that there is that there is that the effect is going to be very minimal as you apply more depending on the crops. Next. So the other issue that I already mentioned a while ago is irrigation does stabilize yields. It's very obvious here that the dry land has a lower yield compared with the irrigated, which is the blue line. We know that there is already a difference in terms of the yield potential. However, one thing that I would also point out in this graph is that if you see that those drops in the lines, those are actually times of dry weathers or of drought in a way. Look at 2012, and you could see that that drops in terms of the yield is very drastic in the dry land compared with irrigated. And so this is one of the other reason why there is some importance about irrigation, and actually it is moving east in a way, just because of this issue of this characteristic of irrigation is that it tries to stabilizes the yield. Next. And so we know that in Kansas there has been a lot of transition in late 1970s. There has been a lot of converted land now into irrigation, and at the same time we have seen a transition from flood irrigation to now more of a sprinkler irrigation. And so what I'm going to talk to more today is more towards the sprinkler irrigation. But at the same time, as you could see in the early 2000, we have seen almost a stable number of irrigated acres, but actually there's something more that is happening across the state, and that's what I'm going to talk to you today in terms of the trends. Next, please. So overall in the state, we only lost about 1% in terms of irrigated acres. However, because of the lithology and the location of some of the wells here in the Ogallala Aquifer, we have really seen about a quarter of a million acres we have lost just because they could not produce any more water due to the well and lithology of the location. So that accounts to about 10% change in the west. However, as you would also see here in the region 2, in the green, region 2 and region 3, there is also an uptick of uh, what do you call it? An uptick in terms of change of transition from a dry land to irrigation in that region. About 92% change within that time frame from 1989 to the latest number that we have in 2017. And so we have seen that overall there is already a transition from the west to the east of the irrigated acres. And we have seen this also across the country. And next. This is very typical also across the country that we are now seeing a big transition of irrigated acres in the Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia area. In fact, 2 years ago, we were invited in Alabama to help them out in the expansion of their irrigated acres in that state. So we know that there is already they are looking at that reducing the risk in cropping management. Next. So I mentioned about irrigation management because that is actually going to be the key. Even though you have water based on the rainfall, there is still some things that we could maximize or at least make use of to be able to maximize the opportunity that an irrigation system could offer. There's the efficiency itself of the system, application efficiency. You could also do some planning tools, scheduling, and some strategies that you could apply. So I'll be focusing more on the scheduling because I think that is very key in the low hanging fruit in all of this talk. So next, please. So first of all, I'd like to have a disclaimer that a pair of binoculars is not an irrigation technology. I say this with as a joke, but at the same time, there's partial truth in this one, because many producers are actually using this as a means of scheduling. You want proof? Next, please. So in Kansas in 2018, based on the NAS, there's actually about 15 producers out of 100 that are basing their schedule based on their neighbors. Hopefully, that neighbors is doing the right thing in terms of scheduling. But otherwise, this is not the best way to be able to make a management. However, I just like to point out that if you look at the Kansas itself, we are about 35% or 37% in terms of doing our best in making good management and good scheduling. But we still are far away from what we would like to do. So I think Matt has mentioned that producers are already doing something, but we are not yet there in terms of being confident to make that good scheduling decision making. So next, uh, we are better from when you look at across the country. We are better because in the country there's only about 22% that are doing their best to make a scheduling in the best scientific way. So next. So if we compare ourselves with the rest of the other irrigated states, I think we are still on the third. I was laughing a while ago when Matt was saying that Nebraska is different, but here Nebraska is actually doing well in terms of irrigation scheduling. They are almost in the 50% category. 50% of their producers are doing something else or doing something better in terms of irrigation scheduling. Next. So, how do we schedule? I would say that most of our scheduling tours are categorized in these three um, general feedback: weather-based, soil-based, and plant-based. I'll just walk you through this because there's really just no time to be able to go through all of this, but I'll talk about some of this. Next. So weather-based, we have different tools here, but basically it looks at the weather, how they are pulling out the water from the crops, basically the crop water use. So we have CanSched, ET gauge or atmometer, checkbook method. If you go to Texas, they have a very similar tools like AskDM and WISE. But we do have also some other resources that we could use. K-State Mesonet is one. And there's already from NOAA, this is called the forecasted reference ET is also available for us to be able to look at. Next. Soil base, which is actually very available in the market right now. Gravimetric tensiometer. There's a lot of them. This is just part of what we could do and just looking at the soil itself. So they are all different from each other. And the next is the plant-based. Some of these are still within that what we call uh, um, uh, being developed as a tool for the farmers. Still on the research portion, infrared, dendrometer, NDVI. But some of these are actually what the farmers are using. It's just the visual. If it is already stressed, they try to make a decision out of it. So if you look at everything, this is just one of those tools. So if you are using one of it, it's good. If you are using two of this feedback, it's better. But if you're going to use all of this is actually going to build up your confidence because not one tool is perfect. So in general, we have some tools that are available. You could check on our mobile irrigation lab. Click Alexi, please click. And it is we now have a new website. It's the mylab.ksu.edu. Please update your links if you have that updated. Have this link before, and we are going to upgrade this in the near future. Next. We've got also some CanSched updates that are going on. Online version still in beta. We're still fixing some issues. CanSched 4 is already out there, but we are still testing it to select users. Hopefully, we could have this be available to the public very soon. Again, in mylab.ksu.u. Also, some handouts, tips on selecting water sensors. They are available in our bookstore. Again, just to summarize, soil type, location, 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 just like your real estate agent would always say. But again, there's a lot of tips that you could get from this, and you could search that out later on. Last is next. And also we've got demonstration videos for all of the sensors that are available within this area. So just go to the YouTube and watch what you think is going to be useful for operation. Again, listed all of the resources here. This is available, this is recorded, and you could go back to this presentation later on and also explore all of these resources at your own time. Thank you very much, and I hope I was able to at least share with you some information that are going on across the state.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very informative. And once again, so all the resources that's listed on the slides will also be available on the K-CARES website within the virtual training folder. So please visit that website for if you wanted to review again the presentation, as well as looking at additional slides and additional resources. So with this, we move seamlessly to the next presentation, and Dr. Bill Golden will give us an update on the economics of groundwater pumping reductions in Kansas. Bill, take it over.
Okay, guys, I'm really happy to be here. I'm Dr. Golden. I'm an economist, and today I want to talk to you about the economics of groundwater reduction based on producer-driven groundwater pumping reductions in Kansas. I need to thank the Kansas Water Office because they helped fund this research, as well as the Ogallala Aquifer program and the Ogallala Water Cap. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about LEMAs. A LEMA is a local enhanced management area. These groundwater reduction programs were put into law back in about 2013. A LEMA is a program that's initiated by local producers. It's totally voluntary, but once it's enacted, once the producers agree, it becomes law. They set their own rules. LEMAs are reversible. In other words, the Sheridan 6 LEMA that we're going to talk about today initially signed up for 5 years. If they didn't like it after 5 years, they could stop it. In Sheridan 6 LEMA up in northwest Kansas, all the producers agreed to about a 20% reduction in water use, which gave them an allocation of 55 inches over 5 years. Next slide, please. The big question is, what happens when producer income, what happens to producer income as we reduce groundwater use? And the reason we're interested in that is because the past evidence is not consistent. Next slide. What we think we know, what economists think we know. Let's talk about a production function. Okay, the blue line on this graph represents a production function for corn. It relates the yield of corn to the applied irrigation water. These come from the engineers and the agronomists. The economists then take them and apply crop budgets to it and come up with a net revenue function. And you can see that both of them suggest that if we reduce groundwater use, we're going to reduce yield, and we're going to, in turn, reduce profits. And that's the takeaway from this slide. That's the only thing you can come up with. It should be noted here that the production function is based on 95% irrigation efficiency. In 2009 and 10, I used similar models up in northwest Kansas in the LEMA area to help explain what their expected losses were going to be when they reduced water use 20%. And we did initially project net revenue losses. Next slide. About the time we started the LEMA, I was just finishing up a revenue analysis for the Wet Walnut Creek Aguca. Now, an Aguca is not a flexible program where the LEMA is started by the producer and controlled by the producer. The Aguca is initiated by the state and is controlled by the states. And in the Wet Walnut Creek area, they were forced very rapidly to reduce water use up to 50%. When you look at these two graphs, you can see that the control area is the area around the aguca, while the purple graph is the area inside the aguca. And sure enough, when the aguca was started in 92, they lost nearly 50% of their revenue. But somehow over time, they overcame that. And in the last years of the aguca that we studied, there was no statistically difference in crop revenue between inside the LEMA and outside the LEMA. And of course, you've got to ask yourself, how did they do that? What happened? Okay, so while our production function method says we're going to lose profit and we're going to lose it from now on, one case study says, hey, we're probably not going to lose it forever. Next slide. So we decided that we were going to monitor the Sheridan 6 LEMA, and we wanted to watch how producers shifted production, crop mix, and what the economic consequences were. I had about 7 or 8 producers that worked with me on this analysis. Next slide. We're going to compare how producers' decisions inside the LEMA were made and how producers outside the LEMA, how their decisions were made. This was originally a 5-year study. The state has now extended funding for this for another 4 years. Next slide. The next slide, we're going to see the several graphs. We're going to compare the control area and the target area. The target area is the LEMA itself. The control area is a 3-mile circumference around the Sheridan 6 LEMA. Next slide. The reason we control these areas, compare these areas, is that if we just look at one area, and this is a graph of the index values for one area of one variable, we would say, well, whatever it is, this variable has declined over the last 15 years. Next slide. But when we compare it to the control area, what we say is, oh, well, the aguca didn't do anything to this variable because the same thing happened inside the control area as happened outside the control area in the target area. Next slide. So what we found is that total water use, there was a statistically significant reduction in groundwater use of 23.1% between producers outside the LEMA and producers inside the LEMA. So the producers, they changed their groundwater use significantly. They reduced their water use, in fact, more than the 20% that was required. Next slide, please. Average water use per acre was reduced 16%. So not only did they reduce total water use, they reduced water use on all their acres. Next slide, please. Total irrigated corn acres. They did shift out of corn. Okay. Next slide. Irrigated corn average water use, and this is going to be important when we look at the economics. They reduced their water use 17.8% relative to their neighbors outside the LEMA. So we know that on corn, they were significantly reducing groundwater use. Next slide. There was a great increase in grain sorghum acres in the area. Next slide. Okay, so what we have seen is that producers were making changes, okay? They changed cropping patterns, they can change water use. And so we can look at the economics of what they did. Now, we had, like I say, probably 8 or 9 producers that were sharing data. These producers farmed both inside the LEMA area and outside the LEMA area. The only numbers I want to look at right now are the corn numbers, the first two lines. The corn weighted average inside the LEMA over the first 5 years was 10.3 inches of water use per acre with a yield of 218 bushels and a cash flow of $375 per acre. Now, the producers were really good about providing their variable expenses. They would not provide their land rent data, and you can appreciate why they didn't want to provide their land rent data, and they didn't want to provide their equipment usage data. So cash flow here is just revenue minus variable expenses such as fertilizer and fuel, herbicide, harvesting, etc. They wound up with a $36 an acre cash flow per acre inch of water used. Now the producers outside the LEMA, they used more water, 13.4 inches. They had a slightly higher yield of 220 bushels, but they had lower cash flow of only $360 per acre or $27 per acre inch. The way, the producers, in interviewing them, they became better managers of crop inputs, such as fertilizer and seed, but they also adopted water-saving technologies. Next slide. The district-wide LEMA and GMD4, since the first 5 years, they have extended it for another 5 years. Okay? And they've extended it more than the district-wide LEMA required. So they're staying with a much more severe water use reduction than everybody else in GMD4. The Kansas Geological Survey has indicated that the groundwater declines are being reduced. Producers report enhanced profits due to irrigation scheduling and soil moisture probes and better management. So guys, the producers have decided to continue the LEMA, which means that they're happy with the economic performance. And I think that's the take-home message of the LEMA. Next slide. Future research. So the question obviously is, the way economists look at water use, if you remember the production functions, maybe that's wrong, okay? And we have to ask ourselves, are we really at 95% efficient with our current groundwater use? We really need to be able to estimate season-long water use efficiency. Now you're looking at a scattered graph of yields versus water use for Sherman County in 2012. And what you notice is if you look, there's a lot of people growing 200 bushel corn, but my goodness, they're growing it with 15 inches to 30 inches. And what this would imply is that there are a lot of farmers out there that are very efficient, and there are probably a lot of farmers out there that are not very efficient. Next slide. Okay, so, in my estimation, the take-home message of the LEMA study, and I should mention that we have a lot of anecdotal evidence from the water technology farms and the water conservation areas. They all report water use reductions of anywhere from 15 to 40% without a reduction in profits. So I think the take-home message is we can do better with our water use. Farmers should be able to reduce groundwater use and maintain their profits. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Very informative and encourages irrigators to use less water and provide economic benefits of it. So we had a few questions in the chat, and unfortunately, Matt Sanderson had to leave to teach the class. but maybe Bill or Jonathan know it and can answer it for him. Otherwise, you can always email those questions to kkare@ksu.edu or any of us or Matt personally, and we would answer any of those questions for you. But the question was that it was indicated that there are differences in responses across the states, 4 states, and Nebraska is definitely different from the rest of states. But was there any variability of responses across Kansas, if that data was available? So do you guys know?
Yeah, Lesky, the original survey, they did not do those analysis across the state of Kansas for different areas. I have not seen a study where he has done that. I don't know if there are enough observations within Kansas to be able to do a good analysis across regions, but I think that would be a good thing to do. I think we would notice differences in attitudes across Western Kansas.
Thank you, Bill. And we will reach out to Matt for additional information if he has any on this. Question to Jonathan. So for producers who want to start using more effective scheduling methods, where should they start? Where will they get the most bang for the buck?
Okay, that's a very good question. First of all, I think before anything else, they should make sure that their irrigation system are in optimal condition. Because if we do irrigation scheduling and they are not as efficient, similar to what Bill has already mentioned, then we are not going to make any headway on that one. So as a university, we do offer this CanSched free. And so in terms of big impact with less effort, I think that's where you could probably do. You could always have also soil moisture sensors and other all of these technologies. As I mentioned, if you have one, that's good. If you have 2, that's better. If you've got more than 3, if you've got 3, that's probably the best, that you have different input or feedback in your field. So that also means that you are also investing a little bit more. So you're buying, you're putting subscription and so forth. So I would say that try first the ET scheduling, or if you could buy an ET gauge, start from there and see where you are. And if you get comfortable of it and you think that it might still push your limit towards I might probably look at more on the soil and how it is being depleted, then go with the soil moisture sensors. So I would say start from one and see where you are, and then build up from there. Again, it doesn't remove, even though if you have 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't remove the need to be able to go to the field and check your field from time to time. These are just tools.
As a follow-up to that question, so is there training available for CanSched or mobile irrigation lab in general?
Yes. So right now, the CanSched is undergoing a major revision. We are going to have a training very soon. Hopefully by summertime, we could be able to offer a training. One thing that we are thinking about is actually providing videos, tutorials on how to use it. So it may not be an in-person training, but we could provide some video tutorial to do it. CanSched was coined not necessarily as a Kansas scheduler. Actually, it was coined before because it coins on the idea that anyone can schedule. And so hopefully it is still a very useful and easy to use tool as of the moment.
Thank you, Jonathan. Another question for you. So you showed that the increase in irrigated acres in central and eastern Kansas in one of the graphs or one of the tables. have you also seen a corresponding change in crop choices? So was it related to a specific crop, whether they double crop or choose a new variety of crops?
That is a good question. We have not looked at that at the moment. I know that the data that we are getting it from KDA, we know that it has some choices in the crop mixes there. I haven't really gotten and analyzed if there has also been a shift in the type of crops that are being grown. So that's a good question, and I'm curious about that as well.
Bill, a couple more questions for you, of course. So one of them, when you look at the producers in the target area or control area and target area outside of it, so were the producers or were their producers the same who own land inside and outside of the control area? And did they use different management choices if were the same, if there was the same producer who had land inside and outside of the control area?
Okay, a good question, and I skipped over that. The graphs that show the index values of water use changes and crop use changes, that includes all producers outside the LEMA, even if they did not have land inside the LEMA. Okay, the economic data only includes those farmers that had land both inside the LEMA and outside the LEMA. Does that make sense? We could not get any producers outside the LEMA that didn't have land inside the LEMA to give us their economic data. And you can appreciate that. I mean, the only reason these producers did is because going into the LEMA, they were very interested in seeing what how their economic system changed, as well as their neighbors, to find out what their neighbors were doing different. And so they were willing to give their variable expenses, okay, and their crop yields. So it was interesting. That worked the next 5 years, the producers decided, no, they didn't want to give me their economic data anymore. They had decided in their own mind that wasn't necessary. They were fine. They were happy with their profits. They were happy with the direction they were going. And it is kind of inconvenient to have to give somebody your economic data. That's pretty sensitive data. So I can appreciate that they don't want to give it anymore.
So only the producers that own land inside LEMA and outside LEMA were participated in that? In the economic,
in the economic chart.
Yeah, and they use different management choices, right?
Yes, I mean, you got to realize that if you look at those graphs, you see over time they're coming together, okay? Initially, if they didn't have to reduce water use outside the LEMA, they didn't reduce water use outside the LEMA. And they didn't change their cropping practices. But as they began to see what their profit potential looked like inside the LEMA, you can see their blocks outside the LEMA adopting the same water savings technology.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question for you, Bill. So you noted that the production function curves are missing what is happening on the ground. So real information from the ground. And based on the growing adoption of water conservation programs and irrigation technology, could we update the corn production function curves to reflect what we are seeing now?
Yes, we can, and we actually do. Okay, I mean, when we do a study, flip back to that slide. Okay, just so everybody knows, I'm not even sure. This is used.
Let me
keep going back.
Okay. This one.
Okay, so yeah, I put this together roughly for Southwest Kansas, but these curves, when we do a study, we vary these curves by location, how much precipitation the area gets, and what the soil type is. So Jonathan and his group and the agronomist provide the data. So this is, I would call this just a stylized production function to exhibit how economists look at water use are used to look at water use reduction. Okay.
And I would add, if you don't mind, that this is a generalized production curve that is actually considering both what dry season and wet season, and so it does not reflect seasonal or even annual changes that are going on in the region. So this is very generalized. But again, going back to that question, I think there is something that is missing out here.
One more question to both of you. What kind of outreach is done to producers that are not exposed to this information that you just presented? And what are you planning on doing in the future in terms of the outreach?
So I could start first. So we are doing some of the outreach through field days, some seminars or workshops that are going on across the state. We are also active in the presentations at the governor's conference. I think Bill and I have been part of that at some point. And so right now we are probably shifting a little bit into more an online support, but just like this. And so if there's actually a need for us to get out there and talk about this, we are more than willing to do that. But again, we are trying to get ourselves as visible as possible.
Thank you very much. Susan, more questions?
I think we have hit them all.
Excellent. So please, so next sessions that we will have will be next week on Tuesday at the same time. We also ask you to answer several poll questions so we can collect data for ourselves and improve our future webinars. But next Tuesday, so we will seamlessly go or move from irrigation scheduling and knowledge on irrigation to the resources that's available to improve it for extension agents as well as for producers and farmers. So we will be talking about climate and weather as well as available resources for everybody online publicly. And we will have presenters, climatologists from K-State, Mary Knapp, and Chip Redmond presenting this. So please tune in on Tuesday. And thank you again for attending this first 2 days of our webinars, and hope to see you next week. All the resources again available on KCARE's website, so please visit those. Thank you.